Extract from a Concord Risk Circular, 2691 CE. Do not provoke unilateral human infantry deployments. If diplomatic failure appears imminent, evacuate all non-combatants within a 5 light-minute radius. Avoid cultural insults referencing weekend. Warriors, consider that what humans call a regular usually indicates a professional soldier with 3 overlapping specialties and a statistically improbable survival record. The War College on Orcs V smelled like cold metal and sterilized air, but the lecture hall was crowded beyond standing room. Cadets clung to the aisles, pressed their frilled gills, mandibles, and lips into quiet lines, trying to look unafraid. A name glowed across the vast display wall in pale blue letters: Infantry Doctrine, Human Regulars. The lecturer was small by most Galactic standards. Human, short hair clipped to compliance, uniform starched hard enough to cut paper, skin mapped with the subtle pale lattices of healed lacerations. She set a battered helmet on the lectern, its surface scratched matte by years of dust and micrometeor grit. Sergeant Nadia Rahman, she said. Earth Colonial Army, 32 planets, 6 theaters. I am not special forces. I am regular. She tapped the helmet. So was the last person who wore this. The cadet beside me, Heshtar. Dorsal plates, still soft with youth, clicked his mandible in a nervous staccato. They sent a sergeant to teach strategy. I pretended not to hear. You didn't talk during a human lecture. Not after the recordings from Vela's gate leaked. Rahman lifted her hand. The hall lights dimmed to the steady heartbeat of the projector. Grainy footage bloomed. A canyon whirled under 2 suns, all red rock and sighing winds. Vria 9. She said, "You've heard the numbers. I'll give you the ones that matter. 1,027 human regulars. 81 armored vehicles, half of them older than their drivers. A week of ammunition and rations. No orbital dominance. No friendly sky." On the far horizon of the video, a black line crawled like the rim of a storm. The Valen host. 5 million conscripts and loyalists, their banners rippling like a dark sea. The hall exhaled in one collective sound, a single creature realizing it had forgotten to breathe. "We held the canyons for 22 standard days," Rahman said. "That's the story, you know. But I want you to understand how, because that's the part usually done up with myth." The footage cut to a valley floor tangled with junk. Not elegant drones. Not sleek Concorde carriers, just her things: stovepipes, mylar sheeting, fist-sized fans. The camera panned past a stack of broken reflective panels. Chalk marks scrawled in a language the translation overlay rendered as curse words and recipes. "Decoys," she said. "Heat blooms. Noise makers. These were cooked up the first night from downed reconnaissance birds. Regular infantry are taught to improvise until improvisation looks like doctrine. We made the canyon network scream with ghosts. On the audio, the canyon hissed. A Valen formation halted beneath the echo of a phantom column. The human perimeter didn't fire. They waited. Patience as a weapon. We called it feeding the map, Rahman said. Make the enemy's intelligence system believe in false terrain and imaginary units until their reality bends. Regulars are not fast because we are magical. We are fast because we put you inside our lies. Heshtar's plates fluttered. It was the Lear equivalent of goose flesh. The notion that ordinary soldiers could rewrite a battle space without exquisite hardware felt like blasphemy in a galaxy raised on precision. Rahman smiled without mirth. The other thing you hear is that humans never stop. That we're reckless. No, regulars are accountants. We keep receipts on suffering. Every casualty gets a purpose. Every hunger pang buys you an hour. Every fear is logged, named, and given a job to do so. It stops freelancing. New footage flickered. A human private taping a cracked polymer magazine. A corporal drawing a grid in the dirt and assigning it names: Murphy 1, Murphy 2, Murphy 3. The translator didn't understand Murphy, but the word propagated across the grid like a joke told by someone already bleeding. Premortems. Rahman said, "Imagine everything that will go wrong and build it into the plan. We expect failure. When it arrives, we greet it like an old friend we'd rather not see. That means we're ready to borrow tomorrow's luck." The hall whispered. The Orcs V cadets had read the treatises and the rumors. They knew the line about humans and luck. It wasn't mystical. It was ugly, disciplined probability. The sort of arithmetic that turns last resorts into second choices. Someone braver than wise raised a frilled limb. "Sergeant," they said, voice trembling through the translator, "if your regulars are that, then what are your specials?" Raman slid the question aside. "We'll get there," she said. "For now, keep your attention on the people who file reports with coffee stains." The footage shifted again. A cramped bunker under dueling suns. 6 humans clustered around a flickering thermal display. One stirred something thick and brown over a field burner. One adjusted a splint on a friend's arm. One, eyes ringed in bruised purple, wrote a letter. The letter appeared in subtitles, "Mom, the rocks here taste like pennies. Tell Bob I finally used that wrench. Tell Sarah the spiders are gentle if you ask nicely." The hall chuckled in a frightened way. The cadence of mundane words, the little stubbornness of life had crept in where we expected only. "Tactics, regulars are terrifying," Raman said softly, "because they're ordinary people who hold one another up long enough to do extraordinary things. We don't manufacture courage. We manufacture trust. That's what holds the line." She snapped her fingers. A new image flooded the wall, a narrow gulch, layered in shadows, ungodly quiet. Wind scraped rock. Then a whisper of movement, human silhouettes rising like dark seedlings from the earth. No flourish, no battle cry, just a steady, practiced motion, each person in a place where someone else expected them to be. "Watch the hands," Raman said. We watched. Gloves brushed shoulders, a steady, rhythmic pat, a brief nod, tiny contact rituals before the terrible noise began. As if they were checking that each other was still real, the gulch erupted. Not a wall of fire, the comfortable spectacle we were trained to manage, but pricks of precise violence blooming and going out all along the rock. Heshtar flinched. I dug my digits into my palms until I felt the cut of the nail. "Staggered fire," Raman narrated. "Every third rifle stays cold. Rotating muzzle flashes to fake emplacement positions. Regulars learn this in week 4. She reached over, tapped the helmet. Week 4, she didn't linger on the killing. Instead, she paused, the feet on a human dragging an enemy conscript from a collapsing ledge. The Valen's eyes were wide. They looked young. The human stripped the conscript's magazine, tossed the weapon away, slapped a chemical patch on a bleeding arm, shoved the Valen toward a rock, and went back to the line. That soldier was reprimanded, Raman said. Then, by a file, his captain wrote him up for breaking formation. Later, she commended him for triage under fire. Regulars live in that tension. Duty and mercy argue. And we try to give both a job. A soft trill rippled through the hall. Shock, disorientation. The story of terrifying humans had grown an organ we didn't know where to place. After Varia, Raman said, "You scholars came up with explanations. Earth gravity, pack mammal psychology, pathological adaptability. Those are true and incomplete. Here's what the manuals say." She pulled a slim, oil-stained handbook from beneath the lectern, held it up. The display wall projected a page. Infantry ethos excerpt. Hold for the person on your left and the person on your right. Names optional. Everything is a resource. If it is not a resource, it's a lesson. If the plan requires miracles, demote the miracles into chores. Eat when you can. Sleep when you can. Laugh whenever the universe isn't looking. Heshtar whispered, "They write laughter into doctrine." I didn't answer. I was busy remembering a station bar on Kishera Rim, 3 years earlier, when the Joe merchant told his story. We'd been drinking fermented seagrass out of shallow bowls, careful not to let the liquid kiss our gill flaps too greedily. The merchant had breathed in great, heaving gusts, rehydrating his memory. I sold them canteens. He rasped, "On Pask's moon. Stupid business. No water anywhere. But the human regulars bought them out. Said they liked the feel." I laughed. They laughed. Then they turned the canteens into azimuth markers and used the straps for sling tourniquets. And by the ancestors, when our dome cracked, one of them handed my daughter a canteen filled with boiled coolant and said, "Sip slow, kiddo." The dome air tasted like an old battery. The child lived. Regulars. He spat the word like a prayer. "Logistics alchemy," Raman said now, as if picking a thought out of my head. "You underestimate how much of war is moving things that don't want to be moved. Humans are good at convincing objects. We cajole machines. We bully the weather. We take old canteens very seriously. A murmur. Some cadets smiled and then stopped, guilty. The lecture didn't permit easy laughter for long. Raman gestured for the footage to vanish. The hall came back into hard, unflattering light. She stood with her hand on the helmet, the way a person might rest their palm on the back of a tired dog. "You fear our special units," she said. "Fine, I won't argue. There. Something else." She let the phrase hang. "But the reason you and your admirals sent envoys and signed papers and changed flags after Varia wasn't because you'd seen a ghost. It was because you realized our ordinary was going to be the end of your extraordinary." Heshtar's plates clicked a question against his spine. "Sergeant," he asked, "is it true that at Vela's gate 1,000 humans held a planet against 5 million? "Yes," Raman said, "and no. Numbers don't hold anything. Habits do." The Valan host broke itself against a geometry of patience and small chores. My private cleaned his rifle. My corporal rotated the cold barrels. My medic made dirt into shelter. And when someone had to run toward the loudest noise, we chose a person who didn't want to. Because the ones who want to scare me. A pause. The sound of the ventilation system, a low animal breathing, filled the room. "Why do regulars terrify you?" she asked, not really asking us. "Because we don't want your planets. Because we don't stay to build statues. Because our victory is when we get to go home and mow a lawn, or teach a child to ride a bicycle, or overcook dinner. You don't know what to do with soldiers whose ambition is to be unnecessary." I thought of the Zhou merchant's daughter, slurping boiled coolant from a canteen and making a face. I thought of the letter to Mom, the Kenyan wind, the hand squeezing a shoulder before the shooting began. Regular. It was a word like a sigh. You didn't hear it until something inside you relaxed. Raman picked up the helmet. Her eyes passed over us like a scanner, like a prayer wheel. "We earned a reputation," she said. "It keeps us alive. It ends wars before they arrive. That's not conquest. That's economy." She cocked her head. "But reputations breed myths. Myths breed mistakes. Someday, one of you will have real command. You'll hear that humanity's regulars are unstoppable. You'll be tempted to throw bodies at the problem or bargain with phantoms. A small, weary shrug. Don't. We're stoppable. Feed us bad intel. Starve us of trust. Make us hurry. Make us hurry, and we become clumsy, and the canyon starts to eat us. But if you give us time, if you give us each other, we start turning miracles into chores again." She slid the helmet under her arm. The hall stood quiet, no rustle, no hiss. Questions? There were dozens, but no one spoke. The Orcs instructors watched us with their compound eyes and soft sighs. Outside, the station spun through the slow turn of its orbit, pretending gravity for our comfort. At last, a cadet near the back raised 3 cautious fingers. "Sergeant," they said, "if regulars end wars by reputation, why do you need those others?" The air tightened. Even the ventilation seemed to hold its breath. Raman didn't smile. "We don't need them," she said. "We have them. There's a difference. Special units are not Plan A, not Plan B. They're the drawer you open when you don't want to show anyone that the safe has a false back." The lighting licked across the metal of her rank. "Pins, you'll know when they're coming," she said. "Because you won't. Because someone like me will stand in front of a room like this and change the subject. Because the transmission will be short." She looked up, somewhere past us, as if listening for a transmission only she could hear. "On Korath Prime," Raman said. Half to herself, the pirates put up banners that said humans don't bleed in vacuum. "We don't, by the way. We bleed after we're back inside." She shook her head. The banners didn't help. The lecture ended without ceremony. She tucked the handbook away, nodded at the instructors, and stepped off the dais like a civilian leaving a bus. The hall emptied into corridors full of the can smell of recycled atmosphere and the soft scrape of many feet, the sound of the galaxy practicing how to walk away from what it had learned. Heshtar and I sat a while longer. He flexed his plates. "Do you think they're exaggerations?" he asked. "No," I said. "I think they're receipts." We drifted with the current of cadets into the atrium, where the War College's memorial wall cycled fallen names in slow cascades. The human section was small compared to other species, Not because they'd lost fewer, but because their culture didn't love walls. I'd read that somewhere, in the annotations of a Concorde ethnographer who died on a moon with no name. A bell chimed deep in the structure of the station. Instructors scattered for the next cycle. A janitor drone traced patient loops around our feet. I wondered what it had seen. I wondered if machines also told ghost stories to each other in the vents. By the time we reached the tram, news had already begun to ripple through mess halls and barracks and officers' lounges. The line floated down 100 channels in a dozen languages, attached to rumors and schedules and procurement orders. 12 words, stamped with Earth Colonial Command's uncompromising brevity. Deploying Special Forces Unit. Designation Ghost Lance. The cadets pretended not to read it. The instructors pretended not to hear. Heshtar made a small, involuntary sound. I thought about decoy heat blooms and canteen straps and laughter written into doctrine. The galaxy already feared the regulars. It didn't yet know what to do with the drawer behind the false back. The tram doors sighed open. We stepped in, as if our footing on a future of peace could be as simple. The doors closed. The car hummed. Outside, Orcs spun on, teaching young beings how to name their fear, and giving that fear a job so it would stop freelancing. Concorde Threat Bulletin, 2691 CE heavily redacted. Subject, Korath Prime Asteroid Fortress, Pirate Coalition. Rogue Cybernetics, Anti-Orbital Grid, Slaved Mines, Pressurized Warrens. Prior assaults, 6. Casualties, unacceptable. Recommendation, avoid provocation unless unit with non-standard operating scope is available. Note, human transmission received 12 words. Initiate civilian evacuation on adjacent rocks. The fortress was not a single stone, but a herded flock. 23 bound asteroids cradled in a web of cable and iron. Their interiors pressurized into warehouses, barracks, and ale bitter markets. From a distance, Korath Prime looked like a seed pod snagged in space. Up close it smelled like heat and metal fatigue. Kesh Malak, lured by consent and murder, walked the hub's spine with his hands clasped behind him, boots ticking the mesh. His body was mostly original parts. He wore the preservation like jewelry. A procession of lieutenants trailed him, a tattooed medic with chrome teeth, a sensor chief whose eyes resolved through 3 focus depths, a cyborg who called himself auditor and never laughed. Traffic, Malak asked. Regular, said the sensor chief. Miners back in, to freighters out. Concorde Patrol 3 light minutes off, holding. No human fleet signatures. Malak raised his head, closed his eyes. The fortress creaked around him, the slow settling of a civilization that believed it would not be punished. Send to all decks, he said. New banner in the main bay. The banner unfurled an hour later. Humans don't bleed in vacuum. It snapped in the recirculated breeze like a dare. Across the belt, a dozen shapes drifted with the lazy conviction of space junk. Fractured plating, a ruptured ice canister, to torn net booms with their spines coiled like dead centipedes. Deeply buried within the ice canister dull, pitted, unremarkable humans rode in a coffin-shaped void with their scrape thin and cold. Their breaths were slow enough to be mistaken for system noise. No radio, no active ping. Their suits had textile conduits sewn with metamaterial threads that ate surveillance like a bland diet. Inside the coffin dark, hands moved. On palms, writing, the way infantry wrote when paper and screens were liabilities. Single words, anchor, quiet, patience, home, a camera, starlight only. Glanced down rows of helmets and caught the easy ordinariness of faces that did not advertise myth. Ghost Lance had names, but used them rarely in the dark. Vega, team lead. A quiet woman whose hair had the memory of curls under its tight braids. Ortiz, breacher, voice like warm gravel when it was allowed out. Lian Ko, infiltration tech, ugly tools carried like heirlooms. Sefu, medic, precise hands and a superstition about coins. Rook, long gun and angles, the kind of stillness that calms small animals. Jine, cyber warfare, a laugh she kept folded in her pocket for later. Whisper, signature artist, their pronouns a moving target by consent. Kirov, pilot, currently pretending to be a dead canister of ice. 2 minutes. Kirov mouthed, No sound made it past his teeth. The canister scuffed against the cable net that tied rock to rock. It snagged deliberate on a maintenance spine and kissed metal with the lightest touch of magnet pads. You could have watched the docking and sworn it was random. When the maintenance drone came to investigate the debris, it found that it had been working for 8 hours without a break and deserved a rest. It powered down. It did not remember deciding to do that. Jine hummed through her nose, satisfied, and slipped a wafer the size of a fingernail under the drone's chin like a tip. They bled into the fortress along drains and utility corridors nobody loved. Ortiz unseamed a panel with cloth-wrapped tools, catching every screw before it could float and gossip. Sefu pinned the panel with a strip of adhesive, so the micro-vibrations wouldn't tattle to a bored maintenance engineer to decks away. They moved without radio, touch, eyes, and the kind of practiced microgesture lexicon you can't fake. A finger along a jawline meant noise to our right. A palm pressed to the ribs meant, check your oxygen. The smallest shrug said, I know, and I'm afraid, and we are doing it anyway. On Vega's wrist, a small strip flickered with poor man's telemetry, heart rates, pressure differentials, a countdown that had nothing dramatic to it. She tapped the strip twice, and the world settled into segments with tasks embedded like nails. Operation Black Nova, Phase 1, the dark, Phase 2, the fall, Phase 3 if required. The flood. Black Nova sounded like a flourish. It wasn't. It was accountancy with the lights off. Malak's sensor chief squinted at the returns that felt like a toothache. We've got drift on grid 3, they said. Background M noise, just grainier, micrometeor scuff, the auditor said without looking up. Korath breathes. The net sings. The medic with chrome teeth offered a bowl of salted seeds. Nobody took one. Send a sweep, Malak said. Drones, 1 in 30 pattern. If it's a scuff, it will show as a sigh. Everything else breathes differently. The drones went out, trilling to each other in the ultrasonic way of cheap machines. 8 failed to report back. The auditor frowned. Finally, jammed. He asked to no one. The sensor chief cycled range. I'm seeing holes, they said slowly, like someone sprayed solvent on the map. Malak stopped moving. Which corridors? The sensor chief called them up. Red ringlets of nothing in the maintenance spines like a parasite's tunnels. Malak's stomach went very still. Seal, he said. All valves, all doors. If it fits a body, it closes. The command ran. On deck 7, a storage door sighed into its frame, and the gap at the bottom wept air for a heartbeat, before the seals took hold again. In that breath of flowing pressure, a hand slid beneath and held the seal up with a sliver of tool steel thick as a thumbnail. Something flat and patient wriggled through, shoulders collapsed, hips narrowed with a squeezed suit's tug. Jine exhaled past her teeth, the quiet laugh finally having a use. They were inside, but that only meant chores, after-action fragment, special operations. Command directive for pirate-captured installations with embedded civilian economies. 1. Primary objective, remove anti-orbital capability and command hierarchy. 2. Secondary, secure or corrupt ledgers and nav tags to unspool logistics. 3. Tertiary, extract or stabilize non-combatants if doing so does not bankrupt primary or secondary. Note, in practice, the ordering behaves like fluid. Phase 1 looked like sabotage with manners. Lian co-glued a coin of metamaterial the color of boredom onto a sensor trunk, and then tapped it twice so it understood it would be valued if it behaved. Whisper blew a cloud of ether pollen millions of motes with a taste for particular wavelengths down. Event, and the fortress developed a chronic case of static that made all other illnesses harder to diagnose. Rook lay on a spine above a market, invisible because he let the world be itself and did not insist on background music. He watched a guard doze and let him doze. He watched a child steal a sweet and decided the pattern of theft was part of the environment, not an anomaly requiring correction. When the guard woke and shifted his rifle, Rook exhaled to match the motion and filed it under known future problem. Sefu set a tiny beacon near a med bay, a polite bell that would ring if life signs dipped to low. He hated ignoring beacons. He was already ignoring 3. He rubbed the coin in his pocket as if it would change the math. Vega checked the time. Phase 2. Her lips formed. Everyone's eyes said copy. They took the grid down in slices, not with a flourish, but with careful cuts that each looked like maintenance error. A fuse popped in a substation so old it had a name scratched into its casing by a lonely engineer. A cable snapped with the sorrowful sound of cheap metal failing on schedule. A bank of batteries decided to coast, and then forgot how to wake. Across Korath, lights sighed and stepped down to a warm dusk. Children cheered in the markets. Dusk meant excuses to stop pretending to work. Anti-orbital Gun 3 was the first to lose patience. Its supervisor kicked the housing. The gun's targeting array threw up its electronic hands and went glassy-eyed. Vega came up behind the supervisor and put him to sleep as gently as certainty allows. Ortiz opened the casing and did something to the gun's spine that looked affectionate and was fatal. Whisper sprinkled a powder that turned heat into prayer, and the gun prayed itself quiet. By the time Anti-Orbital coughed, Anti-Orbital 1 had started to wonder whether its inputs were alcohol. 3 was a corpse that insisted on still being invited to meetings. 6 was about to announce its independence when Jiang took hold of the ledger lines. That tied them to the control rooms. She plucked once. Sing for me, she thought at the systems. Because some code listens better to rhythm than to commands. They did. And in the song she heard a backyard and someone calling her in for dinner. Phase to green, she mouthed. Malak's command deck tilted toward panic the way a glass tilts toward spilling once you've started the motion. The auditor put his palms on the table to steady himself, which was brave or foolish depending on where the table was in the story. This is not a fleet, the sensor chief said. It's termites, the medic offered. Surgeons, the auditor corrected. He had a way of making compliments sound like autopsies. Malak looked at the banner on the wall. It hung with all the confidence of a person who thinks words can bind fate. He felt a sudden and profound hatred for whoever had stapled it up crooked. Open the warrens, he said. Form teams. Hunt the maintenance shafts. Seal the markets. We hold civilians until the grid returns. You'll get a riot. The medic warned. We'll get a riot. Malak agreed. Riot I can see. If Ghost Lance had an advantage beyond their heat-eating clothes and their refusal to gossip too. Sensors, it was their relationship with timing. They did not rush. They were not slow. They arrived in the second before a problem became a story. A gate slammed down across Market 6. People pressed, hissed, shouted. Someone threw a bottle that became a cloud of glittering shards, beautiful and unhelpful. Sefu was already in the crowd in a borrowed jacket, drifting like a leaf toward a pressure point that would turn ugly. He jostled a guard accidentally, an elbow in a kidney that hurt like a confession and made the guard stumble. In the stumble, a woman and her child slid sideways and became unremarkable, which is to say safe. Sefu collected a cut cheek on his way through and added it to the ledger as a receipt. Gate control in that booth, Rook thought toward him. Not with words, but with the arc of his gaze from his perch, 2 levels up. Sefu's eyes followed the arc to a box that hummed with power and neglect. He placed both hands on the box, feeling for the warmth that meant it cared whether it lived. The box did. He toggled a bypass built by someone dead and it sighed, and forgot it was supposed to be loyal to the gate. The gate stuttered, lifted, and then settled again as if embarrassed. In the moment of embarrassment, 30 people became flow instead of pressure, and that was enough. Riot off the boil, Vega read in the geometry of motion. She marked civilian extraction opportunity with a thumbnail against her palm, and did not assign it yet. Primary. Ortiz signaled. Primary was the command spine. Korath's command spine was a narrow umbilicus strung with old iron, and the kinds of redundancies guilty men build. Ghost Lance came at it from underneath like bad news. The auditor was waiting. He had not waited anywhere obvious. He was the sort of professional who reads other professionals as if they were weather. He had 8 guards who were neither sloppy nor cruel, which made them very dangerous. Rook had been holding a shot for 6 minutes, a small eternity. When the auditor shifted to check a monitor, Rook let the moment pass because the man's body language said. He would drop his hand on the shoulder of the guard next to him, and that touch would mean not yet. Rook liked not yets. They were a resource. Vega slid her palm against the cold belly of the spine and felt the hum of current. Like a cat purring. Whisper, her eyebrows asked. Whisper smiled with only one corner of their mouth. produced a ribbon of reflective mesh, and smoothed it across a curve of conduit. The mesh lay there and became a hole in sight, a fold that shouldn't be, the illusion of space where there was none. The first guard to come around the corner hesitated, brain trying to reconcile. Ortiz put his gloved hand over the guard's mouth in a movement that was a lullaby sung backward. Jine hooked into the command trunk and made all the cameras go nostalgic for 30 seconds, in which nothing much happened. They replayed nothing much with heart-wrenching fidelity. The fight was brief, quiet, and unromantic. The auditor moved well, with the certainty of a person who knows how to win and how to leave. Vega did not let him leave. She carried a thin baton disguised as a maintenance probe and put it into the gap between two of his augment plates with a technician's respect. He went down like a system losing power. When he woke, his hands were folded. A courtesy. He saw Vega and understood something about the weather. "You're not here to conquer," he said. His voice made it an accusation. "Correct." Vega said, "You'll make a mess and go." Vega glanced toward the ceiling as if through rock and vacuum and distance. She could see a green planet with a lawn and a bicycle. "We'll take your teeth," she said. "We'll leave your tongue." The auditor seemed to consider that dignified. "Malak will run," he said. "He's like any animal. He'll reach for his bolt hole, and then remember he never finished paying for it." "Ledgers?" Jine asked from under a console. The auditor smiled with something like respect. "You don't need me to tell you where those are," he said. "No," Jine said cheerfully. "But it's nice when the universe is cooperative." She found the nav tags in a safe that had been welded closed inside a refitted hopper. Paranoid cleverness that deserved a better fate. She pulled them and a ledger core that had the sweating electricity of a nervous liar. Whisper took photographs of the exact arrangement inside the safe, because people deserved to see how much work had gone into the lie that fed on them. Ortiz returned with a blunt question in his eyes. "Do we flood?" Phase 3 was the flood. It involved shutting off things that could not be gently shut off, and letting consequences behave like gravity. Vega hated floods. They saved lives in columns and ruined lives in footnotes. "Not yet," she said. 2 more teeth. To reach anti-orbital 1, they had to pass the arena. The stupid glory of it, a pit where Malak let his people watch death become blood for catharsis. The pit was empty now, the audience busy failing to catch ghosts in the ducts. A sound peeled soft and wrong through the stone. Sefu stopped like a dog to weather. "Baby," he mouthed. Vega aimed question at him, sharp and immediate. He flinched. He knew the accounting. He also couldn't unknow the sound. 30 seconds, Vega said. "A gift and a trap." Sefu peeled off, god of small chances, and slid into a surface crevice no adult had designed for a human ribcage. He came out into a storage room repurposed as a dormitory. For cots, 3 empty, 1 holding a Zhou child with big, furious eyes and a low oxygen alarm spinning a bored red. Sefu moved as if the air were molten, and he was trying not to make ripples. He put a mask over the small face, and the red light lost interest. The child punched him in the chest, and then immediately grabbed his hand. "Dad?" The child's mouth shaped. Sefu shook his head once. He pointed to his own chest, then out, then back to the child's chest. The universal language of stay. "I will come back if I can," that too often was a lie. He put the coin into the child's palm, closed their fingers around it, and ran. On the way back, he almost collided with a guard who had also heard the wrong sound. The guard raised his weapon. Sefu raised his empty hands. The guard saw a human in a borrowed jacket with his face open, and a child's cry still vibrating his bones. And he made the least profitable decision of the day. He nodded once and turned away. Sefu counted a debt owed to a stranger into his ledger and added it to the weight. That would keep him honest later. At anti-orbital 1, Ortiz's affection killed efficiently. Vega watched the lights go out across her strip in a smooth line. "Teeth," Jine said over her shoulder, and in her hands the ledger core began to talk like a man who has realized he is not clever anymore. "Malak," Rook flicked his eyes. Vega followed the gaze. A small shuttle, mean as a wasp, shook loose from Dock 3 and burned hot for a bolt hole in the dark. Rook had 7 shots on it between here and the first bend in the cables. He took none of them. Vega weighed the flood against the one body. Special units were not Plan A or B. They were the drawer you opened when you didn't want to show anyone the false back of the safe. The drawer had space for choices you might regret later. She made one. Let him run, she mouthed. He's bait on his own hook. Jane's fingers danced over a cracked console. Ledger sent, she said. Nav tags corrupted to Concord keys. Friendly skies above us, unfriendly below. Civilians? Sefu asked, like a man asking whether there would be rain for the crops. Vega listened to the fortress, the pitch of voices, the rhythm of boots, the loyal sigh of air pumps doing their one honest job. She marked paths on her palm with a nail, thin white lines like tributaries. Phase 3 partial. She said. Localized floods. Markets unlocked. Med bays independent. Keep the pumps. The rest drowns. They drown systems, not people. Command channels, payment networks. The tidy little garden of debts Malak had cultivated. They severed the gravity ring from the hub and let it spin itself down slow and safe. They opened doors out of the warrens and locked doors into armories. They left lights on above the exits and lit them with a color. That meant you can go in 3 languages without words dotting the command spine. The auditor watched his kingdom's abstractions go pale. He'll call you devils, he told Vega, and people will applaud. Not devils, Vega said. And for the first time she sounded almost angry. Janitors, on the dock. Malak's wasp burned hot and dirty toward a hole he had never fully paid for. The bolt hole refused him not maliciously, simply according to policy. His access bounced. His shuttle's face turned away from him with impersonal bureaucracy. Rook did not shoot him even then. The wasp dwindled into belt clutter, a problem for some later story. Time. Kirov signed from the coffin that had become a ship again. Vega nodded. She slung the strap of nothing that looked like a baton over her shoulder and glanced at the auditor. If you're smart, you'll say you surrendered to the Concord, she said. Let them own the paper. The auditor looked at the mess with a professional's pride turned inside out. I will say the fortress decided it was tired, he said. That'll do, Vega said. They left as they had come, a long-forgotten ducks and apologies, in the utterly unremarkable silhouette of junk leaking away from a crime scene. Whisper took the banner down on their way out, because you don't leave litter, and because it was stapled crooked, and that offended them. They rolled it and wedged it into a seam where no one would think to look. The maintenance drone woke exactly when its union contract said it should. Concord traffic control log. Belt sector for hours 12 minutes, and for seconds weather anomaly in Korath M environment. 12:09 civilian evacuation corridor stabilized. 12:13 pirate anti-orbital grid goes silent. 12:15 receive package, ledgers, nav tags. Authenticated Earth Colonial Command overlay present. 12:19 short transmission received. Primary complete. Flood contained. Ghost Lance exfiltrating. In the Orcs v War College atrium. News ran ahead of the official channels on the back of 1,000 messages with the syntax of rumor and the timing of truth. Cadets stood under the memorial wall and pretended the air had always felt this light. Intercepted fragment. Provenance disputed dockworker union chat. Private thread. You didn't hear this from me. But the human specs say their special units keep a list of all the fights they refuse. You mean the ones they can't win? No. The ones they won't let exist. The Orcs v War College cafeteria served food engineered to be nutritionally perfect and spiritually unsatisfying. Heshtar and I sat with trays of polite colors and watched the feed lattice over the condiment bar. News drifted. All assertion and caveat. Korath Prime. Malak's fortress pacified. Civilians evacuated. Ledger web taken down. Sources. Concord, Doc Onion. Prob. 0.74. Someone had added a sticker below the display. A stencil silhouette of a helmet with a strip of tape under it. Regular. Heshtar toyed with his utensil. You think they'll come lecture again? He asked. Special units don't lecture, I said. They leave homework, which is. I waved at the feed lattice. A whole galaxy of rumor management. He flexed his dorsal plates. We're bad at that. Everyone is, I said. Humans use it as a tool. He looked thoughtful. Which on a Lear involves rearranging your gill fans in a way that suggests a complicated wind. What tool? He asked. Restraint, I said. He grimaced. That's not a tool. That's a brake, On the right train, I said. A brake is how you steer. Across the Concorde. People argued in the thin voices of late-night channels. Priests of the Quiet Order wondered if Ghost Lance had sinned by taking control of another people's breath. Dock workers calculated how many mouths Ledger Collapse would free and how many it would starve for a week. Generals pretended they had already planned to do exactly what had occurred. Children traded stories in the metric of Audat in the market quarter of Kishera Rim. The Zhou merchant whose daughter drank boiled coolant told a new version of his old story. He held up a coin not the one Sefu had given, but a cousin, and said, "Humans give you luck, but they expect you to spend it." In a bar carved into the frozen oxygen heart of Askell Station, a pirate who had missed the war by virtue of being unlucky at cards told a worse version. "They cut the lights and the sound," he said, "and then they made us sound like a conversation you're not invited to. That's what killed us in the buried schools of Saint-Maur." A teacher wrote for lines on a board and let their students stew. Hold for left, right. Names optional. Everything is a resource. Otherwise lesson. If plan requires miracles, demote them to chores. Eat if you can. Sleep if you can. Laugh. What does number 3 mean? A child asked. The teacher rubbed their thumb along the chalk and said, "It means the spectacular is just the ordinary done on schedule." The manual line, the one the spies loved to pass like contraband poetry, showed up everywhere, translated into shapes that did not want to become humans' alphabet and yet did. Irregular fights to hold the line. A special operative fights to ensure no line is ever drawn. A debate forum on Poleni 3. Shoot it for 12 hours and declared it a tautology, which only proved they had never seen a line appear in dust and then go away, because someone held their breath at the right moment. On YX, where the insect choir kept calendar by the friction of their wings, a choirmaster wrote a new measure in which the silence between notes mattered more than the notes. They called it human rest and complained it was expensive to perform because it demanded patience. That would not sell tickets. The auditor, now a witness, under Concorde seal, sat in a clean room that made him itch and answered questions with economy. "They did not come to punish me," he said. "They came to remove my privilege of pretending there were no consequences." "What is the difference?" the examiner asked. "Punishment wants to be seen," the auditor said. "Consequences are satisfied to exist." Sergeant Raman reappeared in our lives without announcement, like a bruise you discover in the shower and only dimly remember earning. It was a small seminar, no projections this time, no footage. She had a marker and a wall and 4 dozen cadets, whose curiosity had metastasized into something like superstition. "We're going to talk about no line," she said, and wrote the words as if they tasted like coffee. No line sat on the wall like an accusation to the geometry of war. "Lines are useful," Heshtar ventured. "They tell you where not to step." "Exactly," Raman said. "They tell us where not to step to. That's the problem." She drew a canyon to blunt parentheses. She drew dots, then arrows, then numbers. "A regular unit makes the best of the canyon," she said. "They convert what is into what works. A special unit changes what is. They flood the canyon early so nobody wastes a life proving it can be drowned." She set the marker down. "And then they leave before you decide to build a dam and sell tickets." A cadet with a scholar's crest raised a hand. "Is that moral?" they asked. "Choosing for others?" Raman nodded like she'd been waiting for that nod. "It's a dangerous habit," she said. "That's why you keep it rare. That's why their rules are shorter than ours and heavier. That's why the scariest thing about special units isn't what they can do, it's what they refuse to do." "Like what?" Heshtar asked. Raman uncapped the marker and wrote 3 verbs: counterfeit, escalate, humiliate. "We don't counterfeit atrocities," she said. "We don't escalate faster than we can clean. We don't humiliate, not individuals, not peoples. Humiliation breeds insurgency in the shape of a child. You meet that child 10 years later when they're very good at something you wish they weren't. Then how do you?" The scholar cadet groped for a word that wouldn't offend her own ethics. "Direct people? We design exits," Raman said. "And we make the exits look like ideas you had yourself." She smiled then, not warmly but with the satisfaction of a craftsman handling a well-made tool. "Also," she added, "we keep receipts." Receipts appeared. In Julia's city, the power grid hiccuped into a pattern that, when graphed, spelled out a dead account number connected to a slaving syndicate. Journalists followed. The syndicate's warehouse opened like a bad tooth. No ghost lance signatures, just a map left lying around where a curious mind would trip. The city took the credit. A human clerk in a building you'd never tour checked a box, exposure seated. Local agency maintained. On Thun, a border planet where the ground remembers every footstep. A skirmish almost began over a water table that had belonged to everybody until it didn't. Two militias squared off across a dry riverbed, the air high with words like birthright and treaty. A third thing happened. An old pump in the bed coughed, vomited water, and kept coughing until the militias noticed that any step toward each other made the pump slow, and any step back made it speed. It was a cheap trick of proximity sensors and a little embedded code with a taste for drama. The militias used it to save face. They stepped back. The river demanded peace, they told their elders. The elders nodded because it is always easier to obey rivers than rivals. Somewhere, special operators crossed escalation refused off a list and wrote myths leveraged in the margin. In the Kuan shards, where the last empire shattered and never apologized, a warlord tried to raise a rule by fear. She posted videos of herself burning harvest stores and letting the grain ash drift like snow. The next day, copies of her own procurement orders baroquely detailed circulated with the numbers altered by exactly 20%. Her accountants panicked. They could not trust their ledgers. Her soldiers started eating out of sympathy kitchens. Fear works poorly when the hungry are fed by the people you want them to terrify. Ghosts do not cook, the shard said. But someone had stood in a kitchen and learned the weights of their pots. Not every story was neat. In the industrial slabs of Dirham, a labor strike turned violent because a man with a microphone wanted it to. The man had never been to Dirham. He did not know the names of the streets he called to fire. He bought his outrage by the case. The riot raged for a day until a transmission cut through every device in a 10-block radius. A woman's voice reading the names of the injured and where they could be found. She did not blame. She did not exhort. She just read. The names stacked up into an architecture of shame and care. The riot went home to think. People who needed stitches got them. The man with the microphone shouted louder and discovered volume was not a strategy. The transmission did not repeat. The city decided it had learned the lesson itself. Raman would have smiled at the steering brake working on a downhill grade. On the trade moon of fire, restraint misfired. A smuggling ring that moved children out of disaster zones. For their safety lost its permits in the night. Ports closed around them like eyelids. Ghost Lance Code had kneecapped their runners. But one fell through a crack engineered by men who collect cracks. It took 3 weeks to find her, and when they did, Sefu wrote the after-action. It read like an apology translated into logistics. We stepped back, he wrote. The hole widened. In future, target sequence must include holes as actors. The line made its way into doctrine. Cold and careful. Restraint that forgets its shadow becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. A rumor sprouted that special operators could step out of shadows as if shadows had doors. Heshtar repeated it with delight while we waited for a shuttle. I heard they hide in the vents, he said, eyes bright. That part's probably true, I said. Can they walk unseen? He pressed. Everyone can, I said. If you decide not to look. He deflated a little. That's not a ghost story. It's worse, I said. It's a homework assignment. On a backchannel saturated with bad slang and better encryption, someone leaked a sliver of a training block, low-res, audio-silted. You could just make out Vega's voice. The way she flattened charm into utility when she taught. People think infiltration is sneaking. She said, it's noticing. There are only 4 doors. What they expect, what they ignore, what they admire, what they fear. Don't pick locks. Pick doors. The best door is the one they hold open themselves, a pause. The shuffle of bodies learning to be still. Once you're through, she continued, your job is not to be impressive. Your job is to be finished. Sergeant, someone asked off camera. How do you know when you're finished? When there's nothing left to add that would make you prouder, she said. And the room exhaled like a choir hitting a clean chord. The Orcs Political Theory Symposium convened a special session that pretended to be about ethical frameworks and was actually about fear. A scholar with a reputation for never admiring anything admired one thing: the absence of a signature. They let the world think it did the work, she said. A Commodore in dress, whites that told a story about personal discipline said, "That's a vulnerability. If you don't brand victories, you can't cash them." Raman, who had slipped in as if the room were a maintenance shaft, said, "You cash them in wars that don't start." The Commodore scoffed. "You can't measure that." "No," Raman said. "You can only live in it." Meanwhile, a pod of children on an outpost with bad night cycles made a game they called lines, played in the yellow half-light between power shifts. One child drew a line with chalk dust between two drains. The others had to cross without touching the line. They could move air with fans, drop pebbles to stir eddies, wedge grates to cut vortices. The child at the line could not move. They were the regular, hold, adjust, endure. The ones crossing were the special, reshape, flow. They argued about rules with the seriousness of engineers and the unnecessary cruelty of siblings, and came up with a doctrine that would have made a colonel blush with envy. "Is this how they do it?" one asked after they'd beaten a hard pattern. "No," said a girl with a scar shaped like an exclamation point. "They do it with less yelling." Somewhere far from our cafeteria, Ghost Lance breathed the thin, careful breath of transit. They were in a ship that had been a coffin and might be again on a different day. Jine wore a headset made of old wire and newer grief and hummed without music. Rook cleaned a rifle he had barely fired. Ortiz slept in 10-minute debts. Whisper sat with their back to a bulkhead and practiced not existing. Sefu turned his coin over and over and imagined the hands it might be in, the ways it might purchase luck if luck were ever for sale. Kirov not flying. For once asked the air, "Do you think they'll ever like us?" Who? Vega said without looking up. "Everyone," Kirov said, and grinned because the question embarrassed him. "No," Vega said. "They'll like what doesn't happen and forget to send flowers." "Fair," Kirov said. Sefu tucked the coin away. "There are flowers," he said, "just not the kind that fit in vases." "What kind then?" Jine asked. "Riot that doesn't," Sefu said. "Kid that eats. Ledger that lies to the right person." Whisper made a face that meant ugly bouquet, and also yes. "Next," Ortiz asked Vega, like he was asking for a chore list in a clean kitchen. Vega glanced at the strip on her wrist. There was a job simmering. There was always a job. "Not yet," she said, and the room relaxed into the rarest order of battle, the permission to be ordinary for a minute. They ate when they could. They slept when they could. Whisper told a joke so bad it felt like a vaccination. Rook muttered the names of streets in a city he missed because the mouth likes practice. Jine tapped her fingers on her knee. "Anchor, quiet, patience, home, on Orcs V. Heshtar and I found our feet again. We took the tram to a module I had never noticed. The door had maintenance on it in a font no one bothered to update. Inside, pipes with names, valves with moods. A world that would kill you kindly if you addressed it imprecisely. A human tech in coveralls sat on a crate and read a manual with grease on it. She looked up, registered cadets, and did not stand. "Don't touch the red," she said, "or the blue, or anything. Actually, stand there and learn to see." "What are we seeing?" Heshtar asked, eager. She pointed at the pipes. "Lines," she said. "Real ones." We stood and watched the station breathe. After a while, even our cadet eyes began to notice the small shiver when a valve settled into honesty. The way one gauge fluttered in sympathy with another because they had history. The minute darkening of insulation where someone had found a leak last week and patched it with a grace note. We saw where you could push and where pushing would make the wrong part flex. "Special operators love rooms like this," the tech said, not as a boast, not as a warning. "They ask rooms for favors. How do you make a room say yes?" I asked. She shrugged, grease in her smile. "By not asking for too much." We stayed there longer than lecture would have scheduled. When we left, the corridor felt louder, the air more obviously borrowed. We walked softer without meaning to. Concord Risk Circular Amended Addendum 2691 CE regarding human special operations activity ghost units. Expect absence of signature. Seek presence of exits. Measure restraint, not force. The former is predictive. If you want to know what they've done, inventory what you didn't have to. Do not provoke unilateral human infantry deployments. Retain previous advisories. Do not assume the quiet means safety. Sometimes it means you've been spared the opportunity to be brave. The circular made its way to the War College. Somebody printed it and tacked it to the wall with an ugly staple. Whisper would have straightened it. I let it hang crooked. A little imperfection in a galaxy polishing itself on myth felt like a receipt. The galaxy told ghost stories. The ghost stories told the galaxy how to behave when no one was looking. And somewhere in the long dark between rocks, people who called themselves regular and people who didn't bother with names at all did the small chores that kept miracles demoted. The children on the outpost added a new rule to lines when you get across. You go back for someone who didn't. They argued about how many times you had to do that before it counted as winning. They will argue for a long time. That's fine. Some lines you don't want to see drawn quickly. Outside, a belt turned. Inside, somebody laughed. The station exhaled. The quiet did not mean nothing was happening. It meant someone had decided not to make you watch. From the Concord Archive of Interstellar Folklore, 2703 CE. Entry number 9912, annotation. This record contains overlapping myths, partial testimonies, and unattributed transmissions concerning human special forces. Scholars recommend reading with caution. Note, veracity may be less relevant than influence. The Orcs v. War College rotated its atrium murals every 10 years, a habit meant to show cadets that memory was a civic duty. One cycle it was treaties, another it was battles, another it was maps of colonies that had burned and regrown. The newest mural was an accident. No vote, no committee. Just one morning, the wall bled with hundreds of hand-drawn stencils of a helmet silhouette with tape underneath. Regular, someone had started it. Everyone else refused to stop. The commandant ordered it scrubbed. The janitors wiped until their shoulders failed. The silhouettes kept reappearing chalk, grease ink, scratched in with a claw. The galaxy had already chosen its mural. Myths as Corinthian Vera's third moon. A tavern barkeep poured drinks under a sign that read, "Specials ask if you dare." It was a joke, but the menu offered nothing. Patrons laughed nervously, drank anyway, and went home whispering dot on the academic world of Zelka. A philosopher built a career around the line special forces fight, so no line is ever drawn. He argued that humans practice negative architecture. They constructed futures by erasing scaffolds before anyone else noticed. Students mocked him until the day a border dispute evaporated overnight. The opposing militias woke to find their ammunition misfired, their leaders' bank accounts closed, their maps annotated with escape routes. Nobody claimed credit. The philosopher received tenure. On Ekrith, children played ghost tag. One closed their eyes, counted to 10, and shouted, "Line or no line?" The others froze or fled. Nobody won. Everyone remembered. Ferris Policythe Concord's Naval Command kept a folder marked with 12 words. The folder was opened whenever diplomacy faltered, whenever a fleet commander thumped a table and shouted for decisive war. The words were simple: deploying Special Forces Unit, designation, followed by whatever name Earth chose that year. The words were almost never followed by troops. The bluff was enough. A Meraxi admiral once sneered at the threat, calling it parlor tricks and bedtime stories. He launched a raid against a colony on the rim. 2 days later, his ships returned, empty, drifting, engines purring as if nothing had happened. The crews were gone. Logs showed laughter and then silence. The admiral resigned, wrote no memoir, and spent his days gardening on a world that never asked him questions. From then on, no officer in the Concord called the bluff. Receipts and silence ghost Lance, if they still existed, left little but receipts in the factories of Dirham. A shipment of stun rifles meant for riot suppression arrived, with their triggers wired to sound alarms instead of firing. The strike ended in negotiation instead of massacre. On the desert moon Coro 77, 3 wells poisoned by retreating raiders began to run clear within hours. Later, engineers found old pumps, stripped for parts, reassembled into filters that should not have worked, but did. On Tellus Station, a dock fire broke containment because sprinklers failed. Civilians braced for suffocation. Instead, vents opened, pressure equalized, and a door marked condemned swung wide. Inside were fresh masks and ration bars, stacked with army precision. The door sealed itself shut again, as if embarrassed. The official record called these anomalies fortunate coincidences. Those who lived through them wrote another word on their walls. GHOSTSIV. The unwritten doctrinairman returned one last time before retirement. No holos, no marker on the wall. Just your voice in a quiet lecture hall. Do you understand now why the galaxy fears the regulars? She asked. We nodded. Even the bold cadets who once mocked her had learned patience. And the specials. She pressed. Heshtar flexed his plates. They're scarier because they don't need to fight. They make sure the fight never happens. Raman's face softened, though it was hard to tell if it was pride or fatigue. Almost. Scarier still because they choose not to fight more often than they do. And restraint, cadets, is contagious. One day, you'll command. Remember this when you feel the itch to prove your courage. Ask if someone else is already proving their restraint. She lifted the battered helmet one final time. That's the only line worth holding. Then she left, and we never saw her again. The flowers they never receive years later, when Concord peace held in fragile balance. No statues rose for the ghosts. No songs, no banners. Humans didn't seem to mind. But flowers bloomed anyway in the strangest forms. A strike that fizzled before anyone bled. A child who lived because a canteen strap became a sling. A ledger that lied just enough to save the hungry. A border war that never made it to the first volley. Every time someone whispered special forces are watching, and then chose the exit instead of the escalation. A flower bloomed unseen. The galaxy remembered not in monuments, but in silences wars avoided, tragedies edited out of the record. Lines never drawn. Concord folklore annotation. Closing note. What humans call special the galaxy calls ghost. Neither term is precise. Both are sufficient. For when regulars already terrify and specials never announce themselves, fear itself becomes the quietest treaty of all.